All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this PrintPulse Live webinar. Today, we're talking about Beyond the Prompt, Agentic AI for print professionals. I'm your PrintPulse host, wow, Lee Eldridge. And today, I'm hopefully going to be able to speak a little better than that. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence and what it actually means for day-to-day work in print and packaging businesses. Now, the focus is not on hype or abstract trends, but on specific ways that agentic AI can help support estimating, pre-press, production, and management decisions in print, and what it means to run that AI in a business environment on infrastructure that you can trust and that you can rely upon. Now, we have less than an hour. This is a pretty big topic. We're going to do our best to give a solid foundation here, but I have no doubt that there will be some follow-up conversations. I'm happy to stay on the line past the hour. You can always, of course, reach out to myself or Chris to chat further as well. We'll make sure our contact information is available for you and kind of go from there. Now, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'm a researcher and educator at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm a board member on the board of directors of the OPIA, and I work and have worked in the graphic communication and digital design world for decades now, with a focus right now, obviously, on AI in creative and print environments. Now, we needed some real brains on this topic as well, so I'm joined by my colleague, Associate Professor Chris Smyth from the School of Graphic Communication Management at TMU, formerly known as Ryerson, who will be joining us to give us some of that extra mental firepower and make this work. Now, together, Chris and I are going to be drawing on some active research that we've been doing over the last year or so with a company called Evermore, a Canadian company that designs and implements practical AI and automation capabilities, specifically for manufacturing businesses using private data sovereign technology infrastructure. We'll talk more about data sovereignty in this session as well. Before we begin, though, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Toronto, which is, of course, on traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people within treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and part of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. Today, we are talking about AI and data and automation, and it's easy to imagine these things as kind of virtual or weightless. But, all of the cloud services, all of the technology we use depends on land, on minerals, on energy, on networks that cross territories here and around the world. So when we talk about data sovereignty or sovereign IT, that conversation sits inside longer histories of sovereignty and stewardship on the lands that we occupy now. So as we talk today, I just want to encourage you to think about how your own use of digital infrastructure and resources could support rights and leadership, rather than treating land that we share as kind of an invisible backdrop to the various technologies we use. Now, with that, I'm going to pass things over to Chris to give us a quick introduction of himself and an outline of what we're going to be covering in the session today. Chris?
Thank you, Lee, and for the kind words in the introduction. So why we're talking about this today, I'm an active associate prof at TMU's GCM and very interested in workflow and automation and the impact that AI could have on that. So here's what we're going to talk about: why you should care and maybe why you shouldn't care, what agentic AI really does mean. We're going to go through some of the key attributes of what makes it agentic AI. We will touch base a little bit on data sovereignty and why it matters for businesses in Canada, but anywhere as well, and kind of wrap things up with a practical roadmap if you're just starting out with agentic AI, how you get from the Excel sheet into actual AI agents.
So now that we've, already carved this time out of our schedule to join the presentation, I know you have at least some belief already that this is important, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And talk about why we need to care about this right now in print. And printers and the graphic industry specialists are typically operating on tight margins, volatile input costs, and complex client demands. We all know that projects are getting more personalized, more customized, run lengths are getting shorter, and customer expectations around speed and quality and reliability keep increasing all at the same time. And the data that we need to manage the business is often fractured. Some of it lives in your MIS, some in your estimating spreadsheets, some in shared drives and email threads, and who knows what else. And the people who know how to interpret that data are often your senior staff, many of whom carry the logic around in their heads. And there's a huge amount of what we sometimes refer to as institutional knowledge or legacy knowledge in these systems, kind of long-standing, undocumented, or poorly documented, accumulated know-how and history and practices that live inside the brains of you and your staff and your colleagues. And on top of that, many firms are struggling to recruit and retain skilled staff. So meanwhile, AI has not so quietly arrived in many of the tools that you and your staff already use, from office and design software to various mobile apps. So the question is not whether AI shows up in your business, it's really about whether it shows up in a controlled, purposeful way that respects your data, respects your client's privacy, and supports your people, or kind of in an ad hoc way. So let's talk for a moment about kind of the hype versus the reality here. Now, when we look at most coverage of AI, especially sort of generic one-size-fits-all information or clickbait journalism headlines, the focus is often on general purpose tools where you type in a question into a box and you get a few paragraphs back, or maybe an image returned or an email draft. And that can be great for ad hoc requests, but it doesn't change how your plant schedules work, or how your team builds a quote, or how it plans an imposition. Print is an industry with a very long tradition of adding automation where it makes sense to and where it's cost effective to. Tools for pre-flighting and color management and shipping even, encoding our decision rules and business logic into functional tools. And what's been missing is a way to kind of connect flexible, multi-purpose AI systems, the ChatGPTs and Geminis of the world, to the data and the decisions and the operating procedures that are specific to your operation. The real opportunity here is to use AI for specific, repeatable tasks that already exist in your plant. Reviewing supplied files against checklists, preparing job summaries from unstructured requests, like email requests from a client that don't include all of the information, right? Exploring pricing scenarios or turning MIS exports into clear language for the management team to quickly digest in a report, right? Helping manage FSC stocks and audit trails. That's where we move from sort of the hype we often see on the various LinkedIn posts and YouTube channels into kind of operational value for your business. Now, one of the questions we often get at this point is that if everyone has access to roughly the same tools, what is going to be the distinguishing factor that separates the true winners from the mere followers here? And this is something we've been dealing with in printing for decades. I mean, absolutely no shade to industry suppliers. I know that every new tech release they put out has some additional bell or whistle they're going to highlight on the feature sheet and at the trade shows. But from a client's perspective, most of the time, the output from a well-run and well-maintained printing press or large format printer is not keenly distinguishable from the output of every other similar device, assuming they're comparable cost and vintage anyways. You know, there's a phrase I like to use about tools here, that you don't question a carpenter about what brand of hammer they use to build the house, right? At the end of the day, it's the human element that's going to make the difference in your success versus everyone else's. And the fact that you're on this call already and exploring this topic puts you ahead of your competition just from that. AI is kind of like a fighter jet, right? It's immensely fast, it's immensely powerful, but only if you know how to pilot it. And it needs your skills and your careful guidance. There needs to be a human in the loop here. And when there isn't, even with the best systems that you've used 100 times before, there's still kind of a chance for serious problems. You know, I love this one. I shared raw data file with GPT-5, that's ChatGPT, to analyze, and the resulting KPIs were crazy. So I naively asked, "Did you make up these numbers?" And it innocently responded, "Good catch. I wasn't able to actually open and parse the data file yet." Does anyone in the chat, have you ever had this experience where you gave a problem to ChatGPT or one of the others, and it came back with something that was totally based on an imagination, right? See, psychologically, we expect computer systems, even complex ones like those powering AI tools, to be, if nothing else, consistent. That's how computers have generally always worked before. You press this key, that happens. You enter data here, this is what comes out. This is a shift that I think we all need to get our heads around. AI systems are less like the reliable software applications that we are used to dealing with, and more like slightly naive but highly book-read junior employees. They have lots of knowledge, but not a ton of common sense at times. So first and foremost, human in the loop. And sometimes that human intervention can be really, really important. This was an article posted about a month ago. Cops forced to explain why AI-generated police report claims officer transformed into a frog. I love it. If you think there are any professions out there that are not currently trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their jobs somehow, you're mistaken. They are all trying to figure it out. And we recognize the power here. We all recognize that we need to have a handle on how to use it best. So, unfortunately, the bad news on this is if you're hoping that after this session, you will build an army of AI agents and they will take over your business for you and you can go sip margaritas on a beach somewhere, I have some bad news for you. At least right now, you or one of your staff will still need to be involved at some level. But that said, a well set up agentic AI system or systems might be able to take on a lot of the boring, repetitive drudge work for you. And there's still a huge opportunity for adding efficiency and freeing up time in your or your staff's schedule as a result. So with some patience, with some practice, with some iteration, agentic AI can quickly outperform the kind of generic AI tools that many of you are already using to boost your personal productivity and kind of make a system around things. And that's why we're hoping to kind of bring to you in this session today a roadmap to more reliable, more consistent, more informed AI use. So when we look at the AI ecosystem, agentic AI is kind of the next step up in terms of autonomy and consistency when it comes to AI use in your workflow. So AI-empowered agents move beyond the kind of input-output structure we're familiar with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever your flavor of choice is, being adaptable as kind of a specialized tool with their own resources, their own data repositories, their own custom rule sets and standard operating procedures that can be applied repeatedly to similar projects or processes. So I'm going to pass it over to Chris to better explain what this means here with agentic AI.
Thanks, Lee. If you're a bit operation wound or like to know how stuff works, the idea of a black box, you just do it and it works, will drive you nuts. So this is a very flying overview of what's going on. So we start with knowledge and context, tools and capabilities, and then instructions and prompts. Not knowing where everybody was in their AI journey, so to speak, we're starting at the base level, but AI will take the knowledge and context and works like a director or an architect to put everything together for you. We've probably all seen the reports of the foundational knowledge used to create AI and the copyright issues and where it got all that information. So that's its block of information it's been trained on. And then it updates that with real-time information that we provide it when we're trying to get it to solve a problem. It uses a bunch of different frameworks to try to figure that out, to give it the context. Does it matter? Which is where you get the AI hallucinations like Lee was alluding to with the police officer frog. And so how it works with that is it'll use a bunch of different tools that it can call on as it needs. So those could be application programming interfaces, APIs, they could be webhooks to perform the stuff that it does. So that's kind of your knowledge and context, your tools and capabilities, but it's all guided by somebody at the keyboard or voice activated who's giving it the structured prompts. Won't ask everybody to do a show of hands, but like 2 years ago, you kept hearing prompt engineer, prompt engineer, prompt engineer, and we haven't heard that for 1.5 years now because it's just everybody's a prompt engineer. It's no longer a position, it's just part of your responsibility. So it'll take that information, it can't create the information, but it breaks it down into pieces and can pull it out in a fast manner that makes more sense than just a blanket summary. So it can integrate those together. So like if you ask an API, what's the stock price of Apple right now? If you haven't given it access to the internet, it won't be able to tell you. If you have, it will use an API and bring that back to you and can incorporate it into a better explanation for you. So it includes those how-tos with structured prompting or system prompts. And then the role-based instructions, you create an AI agent let's say it was going to be a junior analyst or a junior estimator, and you give it very strict parameters on what it can do. You can tell it to use a professional tone. You can tell it can only use certain languages, not to use technical jargon, and base it on a systematic approach. So you're kind of directing it in what to do. And then it'll synthesize and pull all this output together and hopefully give you a result that makes sense. But sometimes it will actually just try to make you happy. And this is part of the problem with AI, and just give you an answer without actually telling you that it's making it up. Cool. Probably been beaten to death with the LLM term. These are the general purpose, the chatbots that we were all using when it first came out. So they could be designed by ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Claude. There's a whole bunch of different ones. There's open source ones. There's a variety of them. It takes the prompt and generates a response, and it doesn't search for pre-written answers. It's pulling together a bunch of different things and giving you the answer. The classic one when it all started was, give me a summary of Lord of the Flies. Well, of course it can do that because there's probably 7 million essays written on that, and it can pull it all together quickly. And so that makes it very flexible to do editing and writing, but they can do more than just predicted text. They can logic their way through problems with more than one step, more than one outcome. They can remember what you were talking about and bring that into the context as well. So this is where we get the reasoning models, which let us start to talk about it from linking parts of our workflow together. You can look in the background and they're thinking out loud, and they use the chain of thought reasoning. So when they start doing more than text, that's when they become LMMs, multimodal model, and they can do video, audio, imagery. But we kind of tend to clump them all in the LLM umbrella. So that's kind of how it's working in the background. There's no bias here. Here's a bunch of the more common ones. And some of them, if you haven't used them, can be better at things than other ones. So Quen is fantastic at 3 months ago's trendy thing with vibe coding. Just telling it what you want to code, and it will spin it up quite quickly for you. That's not a strength of some of the other ones. Mistral is a lot better with image work, but that could change in 3 months. So what you're hearing there's one isn't going to do everything. So at its core, its limitations are, it's just knowledge. There's no particular wisdom, or as somebody with my color hair likes to say, life experience. It doesn't quite pull that material in. It can manipulate the data, but it can't actually understand why it's doing it or maybe what you want next. Leading into that is sometimes it's just a little bit too eager to please. I'm not sure where that comes from in the programming. I'm trying to stay away from that one, but they want you to be happy, so you just have to keep them in their place politely. So instead of just a chatbot, what an agent will do is it works from a defined set of documents and data, but today you can make it work from your documents and data, and we'll go to sovereignty towards the end of this, where you can protect that from becoming out in the open and other people using it, which is obviously very important. You can do repetitive tasks for your team. It's like a junior staff member. You just have to supervise its output like you would a new hire. They might go down a path that you didn't even understand you could get down. And as you do that, it learns and doesn't make the same mistakes again, but somebody's had to put the patience into training it. So it can do the same stuff over and over and over again, just so long as you keep an eye on how it's doing it, and it can let you know when it's not. So the core thing is it's looking, with an AI agent, you're looking to eliminate the role of a person as the courier, just taking information from one spot and giving it to a next. The chance that they free key it in incorrectly, just that opportunity in the gap there where it's tough to automate if you've got two disparate systems, if you're a smaller organization and you don't feel like investing in that. So that's what you're trying to achieve. Takes us to the prompt and the versus the agent. So a prompt without context, you're just stopping somebody in a hallway and saying, hey, can you give me a quick price for 5,000 trifold brochures? Okay. Well, they don't have your price list, the margin targets, your schedule, most importantly. They don't know what stock you might have on hand. So they're not able to do that. So chat-based AI, as we've seen in the previous example, they rarely respond that they need more info. They just want to make you happy. So that's a bit of a problem. So you configure an agent to act more like the junior estimator. You can give them your price book. You can give them your rules for markup. You can give them your preferred paper stocks, what you have in inventory. None of that in sovereign AI gets shared outside of your organization. And then you can get them to work each day. And over time, they'll get better and better. So it's about that second pattern. It's not about hallway discussions. It's about roles, data, and repeatable tasks. And then you're freeing up somebody's time to work on something that's potentially more value for their time in your organization. So if you take a walkthrough on this one, we'll start with the customer in the top left corner. And this is the customer's going to ask the agent for help. And the agent, in this case, give me a quote for 2,500 full color, custom size brochures. Need it next week. Here's the specs, and no stock specified. So what the action is it breaks it down into the discrete chunks. I think in AI speak, they call it vectoring it. That the AI agent's thinking, okay, I need this information from the email, so it's going to read the email to find them. And then I got to check my internal data to see what we've got on stock or what our pricing tables might be. So then it looks through the email to do that, pulls that information out, looks to the house stock database, that's your API or webhook, and then tries to figure out the optimal press if you have multiple presses for that run length. And then it loads that with the finishing and paper pricing tables back into its internal vector database of information. So then it picks a stock for you and prices that accordingly using our tables. This is the expected cost and selling price. It can prepare a draft estimate with the selected house stock, cost breakdown, selling price, and the timeline. And then it can reason at each step what it's doing. So it's thinking, you can scroll through the results about the actions it's taken and the reasons. And then it will tell, hey, I'm assuming that this is the stock to use, and let you know that, and send the draft of the estimate with all the details to the estimating team, the human in the loop, who might review that, edit it, and then at that point they forward along to the customer. But the human hasn't had to do all that work in the background. That's all been done for them. So some of the roles that we're running into, that would be the first ones we would look at and talking to people in the field that have worked on your project person. So you pull out key pieces of info from that job request or an update request, and then you can put that into a structured table. That's the key part there. You've gone from an unstructured email to structured table. And then that can be put into some sort of a job system or collaborative system, or the system can be queried. The marketing outreach, you can build it with a lot of your marketing materials and train it to write in your own voice. It's not going to replace your marketing person, but it can do a good job if you're doing regular updates online, or you want to come up with some sort of an e-blast. So you might pull all your equipment and knowledge-based information into there, as well as your history of marketing. And then once you've layered your voice into it, it can supply social posts, e-blasts, things of that nature. That's the creative part of it. It could also do all the analytics as to how's your marketing been doing, but that's a different agent, a data analyst. So it can take all that data, put it into something you can read and that's realistic, and generate the report, as well as do some trend analysis, see what's been happening, what's coming up next. But from talking to the bosses on the call or anybody who's been on this one, it can do it in near real time. So if you're sitting in a meeting and you're asking for some sort of scenario that hadn't been thought of, nobody has to run back to the person in the corner office with a spreadsheet and get this figured out. You can query it real time and it will get you the answers. So it's very adaptable that way. So those are the roles, your use cases, building out standard operating procedures, your SOPs, updating your customer support and user manuals. Lee alluded to capturing the information that's in some of your employees' heads and trying to put that in one place where it can be used. If you're running multiple shifts and there's only one person in one shift who knows the nuances of a specific machine, then this is a place to start working on that. You can allow it to do modeling different scenarios, which it's very fast at. So the comparison, what if we do this? What if we do that? For pessimist, optimistic, realistic, it can run those in near real time. And then it can pull the information and pull it out. So an example, go through all my sales reports from the last 6 months, somebody who bought from me a year ago, let's prepare some sort of tailored marketing campaign for this group of people. And it can generate that quite quickly. So Agentic AI and sovereign IT are kind of tied together, and they're pretty much two leading and technical trends for 2026. It comes into more of compliance. I'm almost talking about geopolitical concerns in there. All we heard about 10 years ago was cloud, and then it seemed overnight it actually worked. The outages, over the Eastern Seaboard were gone when some services got knocked out. But now with all this information and availability and clients not being happy with that where it is, you might not want your stuff out there as well. And this is happening at a multinational operational level. So if you're using something like Amazon Web Services, they used to have just one center. I think it was in Montreal. Now they've got one in Calgary, and they've got another one. And I'm a little paranoid. Ostensibly, they're not going to share your information with anybody else, but it's still not a Canadian company. So that's where we start to worry about where is my information? So Canada has also come up with engagements on the next AI strategy. It's a summary of different inputs. This is the latest initiative to help retain our control over data, software, and infrastructure, because we're too dependent on other countries. And it goes beyond just where it resides to control the technology overall, the supply chain and legal jurisdiction. So they just released, I think it was last week, an update on the thoughts. This is a summary of the roundtable and call for input that happened last fall. So from a business perspective, worth keeping up on the infrastructure and security of that. Which takes us back to the tools. You can have proprietary, that's your Gemini, or you could have open source, which is Open Web UI, and it comes down to the cost. I'm not the only one who remembers when Adobe moved to the Creative Cloud licensing agreement, and so you moved from owning to leasing and the impact that would have had on an operating level. So open source is free to install, but not necessarily free to use. Power and storage costs, you've got to pay somebody to maintain it and whatnot. And as well as there could be costs for the APIs to talk to those different tools. So companies like one of the sponsors here, Evermore, offer sovereign solutions for that using open source stuff to keep the costs down a bit, as well as the assurance that any AI, any data that's used with the AI just stays in that little closed garden. There's no way it gets shared with anybody else. So your information is yours, your client can't access it, and the internet at large can't access it. So the democratization of tech continues. Your buy versus build. 80% buy, 20% build. This is the opportunity to flip the SaaS model, the software as a service, and maybe a little, not capitalistic, but not be as reliant on big tech. You can turn your investments into that, build your own infrastructure without the ownership costs. So if you move back to the buy versus build and start to build it yourself, and your data is yours, nobody else is making money off of it. It's feels like it wasn't that long ago, but the early 2000s, where we all just threw all this data information out online, where everything and everywhere was there for everybody to see, and it didn't cost anything. That didn't really work out well. So your data is part of your IP, your intellectual property. And when you build and develop your systems, that's your own IP. And if you go with a sovereign solution, then you're controlling that. You're not at the mercy of somebody else. So if you own your own infrastructure, you're bringing that data, your cost decreases for storage and integration costs while you're increasing your efficacy and automation and analysis. It's all yours, and you can build off of your own. Probably picking up a little bit of a control freak tone to my voice. Your own tech, you eliminate those transactional fees and associated with the processing data, and gives you full access and control over your own systems. So you don't have to bend to work the way that a major vendor has their system set up. You can modify it relatively within reason to suit your own needs. And then you're investing in your most needed and practical operations, and you can frame that around what your team wants to work on first, instead of just a simple software solution that you kind of have to move around backwards that way. So when you're doing that, you're cutting out your risk vectors. You've got your cost risks, the attrition risks, the security risk. You're minimizing all that by taking that in-house, but you're reducing your costs. If you leverage the automation and AI, you start to eliminate those human as a courier, the non-value added activities, and you can focus on decisions that can help move your business forward. The one part that I love the most, what got me interested in it, is that automation used to always be about structure. And now with an AI agent, you can actually build it to take unstructured information and turn it into structure, which really does open up the possibilities in a lot of areas that we couldn't have done before.
And that kind of brings us to our implementation roadmap. So we've talked about kind of the details of, what it is, why it's important, some of the kind of philosophy behind it. So let's talk about how we actually start, pursuing this. So the first step is we want you to stop thinking about specific tools. We've mentioned a bunch of tools on this call already. There are a dozen other tools, and they will change. Every 3 months, it seems that there's something new or something is better. So I want you to first stop worrying about the specific tool, but start thinking about the questions and the structure that you need to put into those tools. And make 3 lists. List out the questions you have to answer every day to keep the plant running. List out the questions you have to answer every week to manage your jobs, your staff, your team. And all the questions that you have to answer every month or every quarter to assess profitability and risk, those sort of high-level reporting type tasks. And from those lists, identify one narrow question that has both a high value and a clear data source. And that's really the key when you're starting with this, is you want to really have a firm question and a good source of data to work with it. The question then becomes the design brief for your first agent. And approaching it like this helps you keep experimentation anchored in business reality rather than just tool features. You're divorcing yourself from the specifics of the tool by thinking about how do we structure the actual information. So the first step is again, stop thinking about specific tools and think about those example questions. Did any jobs yesterday run significantly over estimated or scheduled time, and why? These are a lot of things that, if you had infinite time in the day, you'd love to check into that every day. Now, I know you're too busy for that, so that's something that is a great thing to give to your AI agents. How many quotes did we win versus lose this week or month or quarter? And what was the typical discount or margin on those quotes from at least an estimating perspective? And then what presses or finishing assets were bottlenecks in our process this month and which were underused by comparison, right? Step 2 is really bringing your people and your data into view together, mapping out the data that relates to that chosen question. Is it in the MIS? Is it in a spreadsheet somewhere? Is it in a production log on one of your machines, or staff notebooks or Excel files on shared drive? Many operations kind of underestimate how much risk sits in unofficial spreadsheets that are maintained by 1 or 2 key staffs. I'm sure you all have an example of this in your organization where it's like, yeah, when we ask that question, we've got to go to, Jane in the corner who has that spreadsheet and figures it out. Next, we want to look at where that data could be consolidated on infrastructure you control, such as a database or a server environment that is within your organization already. And this is where those data sovereign platforms and open source tools often come in, because they make it feasible for you to host your own AI enabling layer of data without uploading everything to a foreign cloud service or ChatGPT or whatever. Finally, we want to involve the people who do the work, capture their kind of mental algorithms and operating procedures. What are the decision rules that they are applying when they're doing these repeated tasks? This is what your agent will need to know or to learn in order to replicate the activity. With the data and the people kind of sorted out, we start configuring our agent. We define the role of the agent, we connect it to the data and the documents, and we specify its tasks from an input and output perspective. And then we pilot it. We use a small group of sort of champion staff member who understand both the work it's being asked to do, as well as some of the limitations here. We ask them to record where the agent performs well and where it fails or produces unclear results. And this is an iterative process. The agent improves as you refine the instructions and you refine the data. The key here is to treat it, again, as that supervised junior colleague or that, that intern you brought in for the summer whose work has to be reviewed, especially early on. This builds trust from both you and your staff, and it kind of prevents over-reliance on early outputs. One of the challenges we sometimes see in this when we're implementing is that, if you have a few early successes, you kind of assume that everything's just moving fine and people get a little more lax about checking the outputs. So regardless of the platform that we're using, building our agents generally requires 3 very practical pieces. And if you remember nothing else from this, this is the 3 things that you need to really keep in mind. You need to have a system prompt, a data source, and then that interface and workflow. So the system prompt, this is the agent's job description and its rule book. We'll talk about more of this in a moment because this is a real key part of building agentic AI successfully. Second, of course, is the data source. An agent is only as good as the information it's allowed to access. Otherwise, again, it starts relying on the general knowledge base it has or making things up, either of which are not great for your business and your organization. So you need to decide which documents, which spreadsheets, which systems it can use. And this could include, again, data exports from your MIS, PDF versions of your SOP manuals, price tables, samples of past jobs. You also can state the boundaries here. For example, you can instruct the agent to rely only on those materials and specifically instruct it to admit when the data is missing rather than guessing. This is where questions of data sovereignty and confidentiality often show up in concrete form, because depending on the tools that you choose, what stays inside your own infrastructure versus what is kind of being put on the cloud for others. Third is that interface and workflow, and this is often kind of overlooked. We'll need to decide how people will actually interact with the agent and at what point in the process. Will estimators open a chat window inside an internal portal to request that draft quote? Will a CSR trigger the pre-press checker from a job intake form? Are you going to set up a hot folder where you're going to forward things to by email? Will managers send a question to a dashboard analyst once a week using a standard template that then spits it out back, right? The interface should be simple enough that staff can use it without any extra training, and the workflow should be clear about when the agent is consulted and who is going to review the output. So there's a governance piece put in there. When you put these 3 pieces together, you have the practical blueprint for making your first agent. Write that precise system prompt, connect the well-chosen data sources, and embed the agent in a workflow that fits how your team already works. Now, Chris mentioned how, you can take that unstructured information and turn it into structured information. That is probably the biggest leap here, because it allows us to take a variety of different streams of information from clients and staff and funnel them into a much more concrete system. So this makes it much more reliable than starting with kind of a generic chatbot and hoping it will adapt itself to your business. So let's talk about that system prompt, because again, that's really the foundation here. Giving the AI agent the system prompt keeps it focused, makes its behavior more predictable and reliant on the data you specifically feed it rather than its general knowledge. So think of a system prompt as its job description plus its house rules all rolled into one. It sets out who the agent is, what it is responsible for, what information it can use and access, and how it should provide responses back. So there are 4 parts we should aim to cover here. First is defining the role. For example, you are a junior estimator at a commercial printing company in Ontario. That one sentence already tells the agent how it can try to think about its position and job. Second, we define the purpose. what is the agent here to do in 1 or 2 lines? For example, your job is to prepare draft estimates or sheet-fed and digital jobs using our pricing tables and our margin guidelines, and to flag any missing information from the job brief. Third, we define the knowledge domain, the data sources and the boundaries here. We want to spell out what it can and cannot use. So for example, only use the pricing data and standard operating procedures that I provide you. Don't invent prices or policies that are not present in the documents. If you cannot answer from the provided data, say that you need more information. This part is where data sovereignty and trust really show up in everyday practice. You want the agent to stay inside the guardrails that you give it. And fourth, we want to define the format of the output. You want to tell the agent exactly how you want the answer to be presented. Again, if it's an estimate sheet, give it the format of other estimates. So when you reply, give me a short summary of the estimate, a breakdown of the materials, press time and finishing in this particular order or format, and a list of questions you need answered before the estimate can be finalized. That way, again, hopefully your estimating team can quickly scan those key pieces of information, fill in any gaps, and get that quote out to the customer. If you want, you can also add tone and personality too. We had in one of the sort of pilot projects of this, working with 4th year students at GCM, we had one person set up an agent that would only reply in the tone of Super Mario, just to see what it would do, which maybe doesn't have business purpose, but can be a little bit of fun. Once you have that, you can attach your data and you can start testing the agent on real or sample jobs, refining or tweaking to improve what the responses are, and accommodating scenarios that weren't covered by the original version. The important point for today, of this short intro session anyways, is that a good agent starts with a very carefully written system prompt, not sort of vague instructions or a single one-line question. So the LLM in this process becomes kind of the brain here, but it's being guided by the data sources and the operational instructions, the system prompt that you give it. And depending on the access you've provided the systems that your team has integrated, it can either shoot the information back to the user, or it can take actions directly. It can write things to a data table, for example, that's then resident in your other systems. Right? We'll post all of these slides and a video of this so you can review some of the more complicated charts like this at your leisure. But obviously I want to keep things moving just in terms of time. So to really make this concrete, here's a simple first 90-day plan. In the first month, if you're going to pilot this, you want to choose one use case, such as, again, the estimating assistant we've been using in this example, or a job information intake reviewer, and you want to map out that required data. And then month 2, you want to work with your partner or internal champions in IT to build and pilot that agent, ideally in the private environment, in that data sovereign environment where your client information is going to be safe. Now, this can be run alongside your existing systems rather than replacing it while you're in this kind of pilot mode. In fact, running in parallel is a great way for you to be able to quickly compare results from what you're building versus your standard way of doing things, and then identify where you need to refine your process. In month 3, do that thorough review of everything you've processed so far. Decide whether the agent should be refined and scaled up, whether you need to kind of pause it, or whether you need to start over entirely. And there will be a mix of that depending on what you're trying to do. At the same time, you want to document the governance around this. Decide who can change the agent's configuration, what data it's allowed to access directly, and how those outputs are routinely checked by your staff. This rhythm kind of navigates between the paralysis of where do I start and the reckless deployment of, hey, I built this thing last night when I couldn't sleep and I want to start using it right now. It's a manageable way to bring agentic data sovereign AI into a print operation here. All right, back to Chris to kind of wrap up with our summary and next steps.
Yeah, I'm really building that agent to unmute myself. Thanks, Lee. That was a good overview. So the next steps would be that you could learn a little bit more about agentic AI. Not knowing what everybody's maturity cycle is like, you've got some options out there. If you've already given your staff access to a commercial LLM, probably they're already using it. Something like GPT more, you can run, what I like about this one is you can run multiple different AIs in parallel. So half an hour ago when we were talking about one might be good for images, another one's good for reasoning, another one's good for this. You could ask the same question of 3 at once and see where they come out with the answer, which I love. From building the system out, you can fine tune them to your individual productivity impact needs. You've got the secure access, which is vital and will only be more important as time goes through. Group accounts for discrete different areas. So maybe you want your front end people to have one particular group, but they can't get access to the information technologies group or the administrative group's material. The agents can be locked down and be private, so only 1 or 2 people can make the edits to them. Group accounts, AI access, monthly fee with no token limit. If you haven't heard the term used in AI speak, if you're trying to do something using an AI, you get a certain number of tokens per day on the free one, or you pay and that's when you get more tokens. So other providers like GPT more give you the unlimited token ability to do it. So from our student experiments, we'd have one student who had 15 different Gmail accounts and was moving her stuff between them to not have to put up with the token limit, versus other people who just would not use the system at all. And understandably, they had some ethical concerns. So it's interesting when you get to that limit. Note the key that they're about usable. You can't resell stuff like this. So you've got roles, data, and repeatable tasks. It's structuring the unstructured, trying to eliminate the human as a courier in the different sets, which is obviously important from a staffing perspective and keeping things down. You keep it sovereign, you're keeping control and compliance in Canada. Start small, because with any change management project, you're going to have some hiccups in there. Internal understanding, technical capacity, who's able to do what with what not, how you can get that to work together. The bigger challenge is once you start this in one area, you can build agentic AIs for specific roles. Like, I'll just use myself as an example because I can't use you. I can guarantee you the number of profs who are running AI agents to help with marking, but we're explicitly told not to do that because that's confidential information from the student's reports that goes into a commercial AI. So there's that aspect. And then the second one is, how do you turn what's personal productivity in these individual little spots into overall operational efficiencies? And that's a challenge you need to be involved from the beginning to help control that. I do want to give a big shout out and thanks to Evermore, who has donated early access to their system to the School of Graphic Communications for our 4th year class. That's 150 students who will be developing agentic AI from a graphic communications workflow perspective. And they don't know this yet, so don't tell them, but they also get the opportunity to weave that in with automation systems from different vendors such as Kodak or Switch and the like, and then drop them into hot folders. So they're actually going to build little workflows for a variety of different things with the generous support from Evermore. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, no problem. So we've got about 10 minutes left that we'd love to field any questions. Again, we know this is kind of a high level overview. We hope that some of that information around structure is really helpful here. If there's anyone that has questions about specifics or wants to go into kind of greater detail about where we've seen successes, happy to kind of review that now. So there's a question in the chat from Steve, what's an example of an agentic AI product? There's actually a lot of them out there. The one that you probably, if you just wanted to play around with one really quickly and you're not too concerned about, if you're feeding it dummy data, Gemini has them built in. They're called, I believe, gems is what they call their agents. But again, if you've got a Google account, you can try that out. And like I said, I would not use I would stay away from using real client data because you never really know where it's going. When you get into more specific systems, if you're trying to build something within your organization, you can look at the open source software products like Open Web UI, which then connects into a variety of LLMs. So you basically can load that interface with connections to other LLMs and other tools, and then use something like Agentic within it that will actually bring things together. Again, we're using Evermore at the university because they've got something on Canadian soil that we can guarantee the data fidelity and privacy of. So they've been really helpful in terms of what we're doing with the students at the university. Does that make sense? But there are a ton. John asked, and any comment about Boodlebot? I've not used Boodlebot. I gotta try it out now. It sounds great. I love the name.
Hey, Lee.
Yeah.
Real quickly, for everybody, if you haven't built an AI agent, just use one of the AI systems and tell it, hey, I need to build this agent. Can you give me a detailed prompt for? So this is where it gets spooky. Now you don't even have to know what you don't know. You can just get the AI and it will build its own AI agent. And that's kind of where it gets somewhat concerning. So it will give you the detailed prompt, cut and paste, feed that in, and it will start to run. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, John, I've not used Boodlebot specifically. I will say that a lot of these are based on other systems, though. I mean, there's really only 5 or 6 big players when it comes to LLMs, which means that most of these interfaces will at some level connect into one of those other big players. And it's also something that we see so much change so quickly on. There was one that we were using last summer. It was a Canadian company, again, had a lot of the, check boxes that we needed, and they got bought, and now they're a whole different company, and that tool that we were using is no longer available. So that's why we tried to focus this most on structure and how to train up and how to kind of put things in perspective, because the actual tools you're going to use are, unfortunately, they're going to vary based on what you're already tapped into, as well as what access that you've got. Ken asks, does Evermore offer services for both personal and business use? Chris, that's probably a question for you.
You could find out about whether they do personal accounts or not. Their focus is on businesses, manufacturing, and consulting to help people implement these systems. So I don't believe they have a personal aspect to it, but I will happily find out, and then Lee can share that information out after the fact.
Yeah, and actually, you know what? Maybe, Chris and I were kind of talking before this call, while, again, we're trying to give you that overview, the structure, the, key points to keep in mind, and a roadmap to help implement. Maybe we can put together a pre-recorded video of kind of a more workshop. Hey, let's build one, film it so that you guys can see exactly that process. Again, I think once you get into one of them, you'll find that most of what we talked about in this session makes a lot of sense. You'll see the spot for the system prompt. You'll see where we connect the databases. But maybe we can, if you've got some time, Chris, maybe we can do a recording of that and then post it for everyone that's on the call. Would that make sense?
Yes, and with Boodlebox, thank you for the heads up on that. That's heavily geared towards my world, Lee and I's world, for education and collaboration. I'm not sure that's the first one I'd go to for operational efficiency. It's trying to keep a lot of people happy and contributing where you want to lock that down. But thanks for the heads up. I had not heard about that solution.
I want to make sure we're mindful of everyone's time here, and we really appreciate you being on the call today. This is one of our webinars in the PrintPulse Live series put on by the OPIA. The OPIA is the leading advocate for Ontario's print and graphic communication industry, and we are working to empower businesses with expert regulatory support, with industry networking, with exclusive benefits and professional development opportunities like this one to help you stay ahead in an evolving marketplace. We're also really excited that last week we had a great meeting with the Ministry of Labor to talk about training specifically in the print industry, and you'll see some more information from the OPIA about that in the weeks to come, about how that went and where we're going from there, because we know that's a huge concern for a lot of our members and the industry at large. Finding good staff that are going to stick around, that are worth training and worth bringing in and keeping, and making people, see the value of a career in print is a huge concern for a lot of you. So we really appreciate your support in all of that. We really appreciate you being on the call today. And again, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, comments, suggestions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the other OPI members that are on the call today. Chris, of course, you can find his information on the Toronto Metropolitan University website if you need it. And we'll make sure that this video gets posted so that if there's anything you want to review and go over, it's available to you. But thank you so much for being on the call. Really appreciate it, everyone. And thank you, Chris, for joining me and filling in all those blanks where I was just like, this is beyond me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.